Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. Tonight's lecture is sponsored by Ben. Go Ben! And I'm not the sponsor. There's actually somebody else on planet Earth named Ben. And they're actually watching the lecture live. Or it's another Ben. Anyway, the sponsor has a message. The title of the lecture is Defensive Resources in Worse Positions. And the message is, we all prefer to win, but defending worse positions and saving draws is just as important. Show us some defensive resources to look out for. And that reminds me of a story of two analysts, Anatoly Karpov and Viktor Korchnoi. And a grandmaster told me when Karpov and Korchnoi are analyzing a game afterwards, if they get to a position which is not favorable in the analysis, so let's say Karpov's analyzing and then they get to a position where Karpov doesn't like his position, he stops, goes back to some position he did like and tries to analyze, something that's better. And he says Korchnoi doesn't do that. Korchnoi will defend worse positions in analysis. So there was a different kind of analysis back and forth with those two. I don't mean when they were playing each other. I just mean like in general, when they were analyzing their game. Karpov didn't like analyzing positions where he was worse, where Korchnoi didn't seem to mind. This gets said often. It's probably not true, but it makes the lecture look good. One of the biggest differences between super grandmasters and grandmasters and masters and class players and novice players is defense. And defense isn't talked about a lot because it's not sexy. People are like, I sacked my queen, and I did double, triple, quadruple discovered checkmate, which actually I did yesterday. I actually did a queen sacrifice and I smothered double checkmate in my opponent. And so people like that because they're like, oh, look, he sacked his queen and he did this. But you have to realize that unfortunately, you're going to make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, your position is going to be worse or lost. And then you have to win those games. And anybody can win when they're up a queen and a rook, or they have mate and one and you play mate and one. But winning and drawing when you have a worse position, that's a skill in its own. Now, unfortunately, although in the case of this lecture, fortunately, I have bad positions a lot. Some of that is because my opening repertoire is very suspicious. So I thought I'd have a plethora of games to look at where my position's not very good or I'm getting attacked and the engine doesn't like my game, but I end up defending properly and getting counterplay and turning the tables. But when I saw the lecture topic, I thought of one game in particular. I'm slightly worried I'm going to take too much time on it, but it's the other games are my games, so it's not really missing anything. And that game was the famous game played this year, the most famous game between Gukesh and Magnus. And it's not famous because Gukesh defended well, which is the topic of the lecture. Is he has defensive resources and definitely worse and or lost position. It's famous because this is the Magnus banging the table. Those kind of outbursts happen. It's unfortunate. And you could imagine Magnus must have thought he was winning if he bangs the table at the end of the game, and he probably was. Okay, now I had an argument with myself which is better than when I argue with my wife, because then I never win. but arguments with myself, I can win one side or the other, about whether to start at move 20 and talk about the position and the defensive resources, or if I should show the whole game. I decided to show the whole game so you guys see like how it occurred that Gukesh got into a worse position. Gukesh has white, and he's white against Magnus. This game was played a couple months ago. They played Ruy Lopez. Okay, and to me, D3 is an important move, avoiding the Berlin endgame. For those of you who don't know, castles, knight takes. This ending has been played to death. Seems like black's about equal. Another way to quickly draw is to take this pawn, A4, D5 takes, and then this happens. Okay, and then obviously if the game was a quick draw like that, then I wouldn't be showing it to you. Okay, now if white wants to avoid all of that nonsense, then in my opinion, the best move is D3. Then we just get like a regular kind of Ruy Lopez. That's what Gukesh did. And what you, the average player, can learn from Gukesh is you don't look at your opponent and go, wow, my opponent's good, which would be the case if you were playing Magnus. I hope I can draw. Okay, that's definitely not the way you think about chess if you're trying to become, better. And Gukesh is the world champion, so when he's white, he doesn't think about what a glorious day it would be if he could draw. And a lot of people who are watching this lecture have this problem. You're rated 1250 and your opponent's rated 1510, and you're like, man, my opponent's much higher rated than me. I hope I draw. Oh, okay. So the right way to look at it is my opponent's no good and I'm good and I'm going to win. And Gukesh isn't playing for a draw with white against anybody. Often he's not playing for a draw with black because he's Gukesh, he's world champion. Okay, so bishop c5. When I have black in this position, I play d6, but most grandmasters play bishop c5. C3, castles. If white doesn't play c3, black usually plays knight d4. That's another line, like castles, knight d4, attacking the bishop, knight takes, bishop b6, then black plays c6 and d5, or c6 and d6. And it's sort of boring. So Gukesh plays c3. Normally I would make a C3PO joke, but we got a lecture to give, so I can't just be making jokes. Okay, castles, d6, h3, and just typical Ruy Lopez, slow maneuvering, not much going on. Okay, and finally, Gukesh plays d4. Nothing's been traded yet. I assume knight g6. Yeah, that's the point of knight e7, was to play knight g6. Now, typically, usually not both sides, but one side or the other gets a kingside attack because you can imagine things happening, and sometimes white does that. But white played a4 and d4, so white was sort of concentrated on the queen side in the center. Okay, knight f1, c5, knight g3. Knights are all on g3, f3, g6, and f6. Trade, takes. Bishop b7, putting pressure on the e-pawn. d5. Okay, and Fischer once famously said, if you want to get squares, you have to give squares. And the analogous quote that I will give you in this position is, if you want to kill one bishop, you got to make the other bishop better. So Gukesh kills the bishop on b7. Bishop on b7 looks sort of stupid now. But the bishop on b6, now we're talking. That's a bishop. So Gukesh decided to kill one bishop, let the other bishop be good, and maybe I can trade off with bishop e3 if the bishop is too strong on b6. a5. See, bishop e3. What did I tell you? Okay, bishop c8. Now that opens the line for the rook. b3. Takes. And now knight f4. So white's slightly ahead in the center. White has more space. Queen side sort of a draw. And black is trying to win on the king side by getting a king side attack. Since this bishop controls the squares where the knights could go, and this bishop isn't doing the same thing. So black has more activity for his knights on the king side. Bishop c6, rook b4, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. Queen c2, g6. g6 is twofold. It stops knight f5 forever, and black wants to play h5, h4 later. King h1, put it in h. Bishop a6. Queen a2, threatening the a pawn. Bishop d3, attacking the e4 pawn, which is going to be more important than the a5 pawn. So he defends his e pawn, knight d2. Now, this is probably a good place to start talking about the title of the lecture, defensive resources in worse positions. Black's pieces are all great. Rook on b4, bishop d3, knight f4, knight f6. And we're putting tremendous pressure on the e4 pawn. And instead of white giving up and saying, well, I'll take this pawn, and then the remaining pawns are weak, white defends all of the weak pawns by playing the move knight d2. This not only defends the e4 pawn, it defends the b3 pawn. Now white's threatening queen takes a5. h5, I said black was going to try to play h5, h4. I wasn't lying to you. Queen a5, trade queens, and h4. And the knight is defending the pawn on e4, and the knight's attacked. So rook a4 was played. This is a brilliant move, which is easy to overlook. And the idea is, I'll make a silly move for white, king h2. Now the engine's going to say king h2 is the best move. The idea is, if you win a free piece, your knight's hanging and the knight's defending the bishop. So white's either going to win the knight or win the bishop on d3. So white defends the e-pawn by playing rook a4. So now, if Magnus moves his rook away to a safe square, let's say here, now I can move my knight and my pawn is sufficiently defended. So Magnus put the other rook on b8. Makes sense. Then rook a2. Just defending on the second rank. And again, we have the same trick. Takes, and white gets the piece back. King g7. Rook a7. Rook d4. Okay, now this position, Magnus is definitely threatening the knight, because Previous to this, the knight was defending the bishop. But now the rook is defending the bishop. Man, this is like defensive resources from a better position. Magnus is using his defensive resources to defend his bishop. White's using the defensive resources not to lose the game. So now, if it's black's turn to move, now the rook is defending the bishop. So he played knight f3, attacking the rook. Takes. Now all of black's pieces are hanging. Knight takes h3, getting that's called a desperado. There's 3 pieces hanging. White's going to take something. White's either going to take the knight or take the rook. And if the knight moves away, now when you take the rook, the bishop isn't protected. So he does a desperado. Knight takes. Try to get as much material as possible. Pawn takes. Bishop takes. And now the smoke has sort of cleared. And it's clear that white is trying to draw. White has a much worse pawn structure. White's pawns are scattered around the board. Black's pieces are all in the center. Black has one pawn chain, or one pawn island, I should say. All the pawns are next to each other on files. White has isolated pawns. Bishop on e4 is a monster. d5 is weak. b3 is weak. So obviously, Gukesh is playing for a draw here with white. Plays king h2, which unpins his knight. So now Gukesh is threatening the rook. And when your opponent has threats and pins, you try to eliminate any of the possible forks or skewers or pins or things like that. One thing that's risky about king h2 is you worry about knight g4 check. That's why it's good to have pawns next to each other, like white has here. Controls all the squares in front of it. Okay, rook d1. The rook was attacked, so he moves his rook. If Magnus takes this and then takes on d5, white has this resource of taking on f7. So Magnus continues the pressure. Now if the knight moves away, then checkmate. If the knight moves to h4 or g5. Okay, so he played g4. And this is a good resource because this gives the king the g3 square, so there's no more checkmates. And it takes away the h5 square for the knight. So we can attack the knight later or play king g3 or play knight g5. In fact, if I was white, I would consider knight g5 attacking f7 and the bishop. And rook here is no longer checkmate because I have g3 for my king. So giving your king squares when it has no legal moves is a good defensive resource. Because black is attacking here in the endgame, as we saw from the rook h1 mate variation. Okay, bishop takes d5. Black wins a pawn. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook e2. White is trying to defend. White's down a pawn. White's b pawn is hanging. White has some knight g5 tricks, trying to get his pawn back. Knight f4 attacking the rook. Then Magnus plays king f6. Gukesh wants to play rook to the 7th rank. h4. So Gukesh wants to play knight g5. Magnus wants to play rook h8 and rook takes h3 checkmate, or rook takes b3. So, for example, if we threaten mate now, rook takes mate, then knight g5 is the defensive resource that Gukesh is looking for. So that's why Magnus plays king f6. Now h4. So the knight can go to g5. And rook h8 doesn't attack the pawn because it's defended by the knight. And we give more escape squares for the king. King e6. Knight g5 check. Checks his king down the board. Now both sides could get checkmated. Rook check. Rook check. Knight e4 check. King g3. It's important that Gukesh doesn't play rook f2, because after king e3, your knight's hanging and your knight's protecting your rook. So that would just be winning for black. So because Gukesh played g4 and h4, he's got squares for his king, king g3. Now Gukesh is threatening both pawns. d5, sacrificing a pawn. Magnus wants to make a queen. Knight takes. Then rook f8. In this position, both players were in time trouble. So after rook f8, white played rook f2 check. Now, the point of rook f8, and again, if you're not thinking defensively, it's because you're not looking at your opponent's offense. If white plays an obvious move, like knight d7, saves the knight, attacks the rook, attacks the e-pawn, then black is winning immediately. Hopefully you guys at home can see that. Knight h5 check. And the rook is attacking the rook on f3. And white's in check. So rook f2 check. White's going to continue giving checks. He doesn't lose his rook. King e1. Knight to d7. Now in this position, black played knight e2 check, which loses the game. The point is, if you check on h5, now white can play either h6 or h takes g6, and pawn's pretty strong, and this pawn's attacked. So Magnus didn't want that. Magnus miscalculated here. White defended so well for so long, now Magnus cracked. Played knight e2 check. And Magnus saw rook takes knight and knight takes rook, and he thought he's going to promote his d-pawn. This is where you need to look for defensive resources. So the defensive resource here is when black makes a queen, white has to play knight c3 check, forking the king and queen. Then white's actually winning. So can you guys figure out how Gukesh can do that? Actually, there's two ways he can do it. He can do it via g5 e4 or via c5 e4. Either way, after d1 check, knight c3 check is winning. So he played knight e6, knight c5 attacking the pawn, king e3. If Magnus plays d2, then knight e4 is winning. If we make a queen, now h5 wins, but king f3 is the easiest, then h5. And if you make a knight, then h5 is winning. Pawn's too fast, and got this pawn over here. So Magnus played king e3, stopping knight e4. And now white only has one winning move, and Gukesh was in time trouble, but he figured it out. You want to get your knight to c3 so this pawn isn't so dangerous. And Gukesh found knight a4, the only winning move. e4, h5. Now, Gukesh is stopped from playing knight c3, knight b2, knight check, and king f4. So brilliant defense by Gukesh against Magnus of all people. And hopefully you want to defend as well as Gukesh, and you want to learn how to defend better, give your king more squares, and see your opponent's threats. The number one defensive resource in your mind is to see your opponent's threats, then do something about them. All that stuff is important, but what you guys really want to know about is, when did Magnus bang the table? And the answer is now. And Magnus realized if he plays d2, then knight takes e3, and obviously white can win any way he wants here. And after king f4, Magnus resigned. And Magnus knew he had a big attack against Gukesh's king, and Magnus was a pawn up in the endgame for a while. But in time trouble, sacrificing a piece and missing his opponent's defensive resources really cost him. And in this position, with no time on your clock, you have to think the way that I explained, which is when black plays when black plays d1 equals queen, I have to play knight c3 check. Then it turns out white has more than one way to get his knight there. And obviously Magnus didn't see that. Magnus probably thought takes, and here, and I'm winning, and look at me. And there's two funny lines. One is this one, and then you take the pawn. The other is if white plays h5 immediately. A lot of people think that the reason Magnus played this variation was he calculated h5 and then queen check. King has to go to the h file. It can't go to to f4. And then this wins the queen. And a lot of people think that that's what Magnus saw when he played knight e2 check. He saw takes, d4, h5, both sides queen, and then black wins. So this is why Magnus played knight e2 check, according to most people. I believe that too. And didn't see that instead of white playing for a queen and losing the game, white's knight can get back on a treacherous journey. There's more than one way to do it. But Magnus obviously didn't see that. This is a better way, knight c5, because you're putting pressure on the pawn and you're stopping e4. So the knight's good on c5. And knight a4 is the only winning move. And then Magnus resigned in this position and famously banged the table. Well, I'm done looking at this game, so rawr, bang the table. Okay, the next two games are mine. Okay, so I have black. I'm playing somebody with the exact same rating as me. We were both 2,500 FIDE. This was in 1999. We played a very sharp Sicilian where we opposite side castled. It's a Fischer-Sozin variation. Queen e8 is a move that I learned from an old book. Beliavsky used to play it in the mid-70s. Now nobody plays it, so everybody forgot about it. Most people either play queen c7 here or knight a5. Those are the two moves that are usually played. Okay, rook g1. my opponent's attacking me, and g5. Okay, now I played b4, and my opponent played knight a4. So obviously, white's getting a big attack on the king side against my king, and I don't really have an attack against my opponent's king. So here, Anish Giri would be proud of me. He'd be especially proud that I'm making fun of all of his draws. In this position, I did what grandmasters call vacuuming the board. When somebody's attacking you and you're like, man, that's a good attack. I wish I was white. Okay. I wasn't thinking that, but you can vacuum the board by trading everything off. Then if you trade everything off, they won't mate you because there's no pieces left. So here I vacuumed the board. I took and I played the move e5. And this lets me trade a lot. I was worried to win this pawn because I was worried about bishop f6. And you can see if I take, he takes with check. And my bishop's hanging and I'm getting mated. And if I defend my bishop, plays queen h5, I'll make a random attacking move. And then queen h6, confusing the audience, which is you. You're the audience. And the reason I know about this is I've seen these things happen before. And if you take the queen, it's checkmate. And if you don't take the queen, it's checkmate here. So I was worried about that because I've seen that before. So my defensive resource is to get rid of all of the pieces. Then there's no mate because there's no pieces. So I played e5. Now his bishop's lined up with my queen. So I take the knight and then I play bishop c5, threatening his rook and threatening the bishop. So he plays bishop d4. And I've successfully vacuumed the board. So that was a good defensive resource, me playing e5 and trading everything. Now material's equal, and the engine says white is slightly better, but it should be a draw. Okay, now in this position, I broke my arm, patting myself on the back for such great defense. Then I played badly the next few moves. He played e5. He wants to play e6. Also, there's some world where he plays rook h4, queen h5. So I played a5. I didn't care if he played e6, which is wrong. And he played e6. And then I blundered here. I played queen c6, letting him play e7. And when he played e7, and before he played e7, I said, e7 doesn't matter. I'll just block it, and eventually I'll win his pawn. Then he played rook e1, and I sat here for a few minutes, and I went, why did I let his pawn get to e7? So after my great defense and trading all the pieces off, now I have to play more great defense. And as you all know, the best defense is a good offense. And vice versa. So here I decided my game really sucked because he has a passed pawn on the 7th rank and my rook's blocking it. So I played for counterattack. I played b3, sacrificing a pawn to open his king. He took, which is correct, and I played queen g6 check. Okay, now pause the video and think about what you would do with white. Then decide what you do with white. Then unpause the video and we'll see how you did. The answer is you did better than my opponent, or you didn't. My opponent is a 2,500 FIDE grandmaster. So it's okay if you blundered like he did. In this position, he should just move his king. Probably the best move is king a2. Now I take on g5, and his king is a little exposed, a little bit, you know, so forth. Okay, but the engine says something like white is +4. My opponent blundered, and I knew it was a blunder before he did it. I knew he couldn't do it. Here, and there's 2 times in my life where my opponents put their head down and were shaking their head. One of them was against Ferdinand Hellers in 1990 in Iceland. If you go to the internet and type in Hellers Finegold, he's a Swedish grandmaster, Ferdinand Hellers. He put his head down and shook his head when I played g5 in the middle game. I think it was move 13, something like that. Because he ended up losing a piece. In this position, it's black to play and win. And when I made the move, my opponent put his head down and shook his head, just like Hellers did. Pro tip for you amateurs out there, if your opponent puts their head down and shakes their head, you're probably doing pretty well. Okay, hopefully you guys have seen this before or know the trick. Rook takes e7, confusing the audience being my opponent. Now white has to resign because I'm threatening rook takes queen. Queen takes rook is illegal because it's pinned. So queen takes queen's the only move. Then I throw this rook check in, and then I take, and I'm up a rook. Yay, I can win up a rook. I'm that good. So that game I had to defend twice. I had to trade all the pieces off so he wouldn't mate me. And then I had to find b3 to give myself some swindling chances with his open king. b3, probably not the computer move, but the best human move. Give yourself a chance. Because with the pawn on e7, white's winning in the long run, because I'm stupid letting his pawn get to e7, but not in the short run. The short run, it was the do run, run, run. Okay, last but not least, game I played on the internet against Daniel Gurevich, who currently is at Princeton. And if you guys heard of Matt Larson, I don't know if you've heard of Matt Larson. I've talked about him a lot on my stream. He's an IM. They're currently, I think, roommates at Princeton. Man, the truth hurts. So I'm in a basement in Atlanta, and Daniel Gurevich is at Princeton. He was probably the highest rated player in Georgia. He was higher rated than me, but not during this game. This game was played in 2014. Daniel Gurevich was like 14, 15 years old. So I was still higher rated than him. Okay, I prepared this game a line in the Dragon Sicilian, which I don't play with black. But I knew what he played. And I wanted to do a lecture on defensive resources and worst positions. So I gave myself a worst position with opposite side castling so I could help you guys out in 11 years. And that day is today. Okay, in this position, d5 is the most common move. I played knight takes knight, as was my prep. Bishop e6. Rook c8. This is still my prep. Knight d7. I think this is still my prep. Yeah, this I still know this. This is my preparation for the game. The idea is bishop b5 blocks my queen, so he's threatening queen g5 check. For those of you who are like, why didn't he play queen g5 check last move? That's because my queen defends it. So now he's threatening queen g5, so I take. Now if he takes with the knight, then I take the bishop, defending my pawn again. So he played king c1. Rook takes c3. Exchange sacrifice. h6 check. Bishop takes. I think this is still my prep. He can accept the exchange sacrifice, but this looks good for black. His pawn structure's messed up. F pawn's weak. His pawns can't move anywhere. They're not mobile. I can play rook c8 and put pressure on his double pawns. White doesn't have any pawn breaks. It's not good for white. So he played bishop takes, rook c5. He traded and trapped my bishop. So my prep is over. And I think this position's about equal with perfect play. Okay, rook d8. Now if he plays bishop f5, I can trap his bishop. So, oh, this is the game. Right. Yeah, if he plays bishop a4, I can play b5. Then if he plays rook d5, I can play rook takes a4. And black is 2 pawns up. So he played bishop f5, e6. Okay, now I have to defend this position where my king is trapped on the back rank. But you need to get counterplay. You have to have active play. Of course, if I don't do anything, he'll play rook here and take my bishop. So I get a pawn from my bishop. I can't wait for him to play rook a1, because then if I take, he plays rook takes rook on a5. So we have to give our bishop away immediately. Now king g8. Now, if you remember the first game, I was like, Gukesh, his king is getting mated against Magnus, but he moved the pawns in front of his king, and his king had squares, and eventually, last move of the game, Gukesh played king f4 and won. This is the same thing. My king is trapped on the back rank. There's too many back rank issues. For example, white can play rook e1, and then take the pawn, and I can't take his rook because of back rank mate. So I have to get my king over to the queen side. Rook c1, stop his rook. f6, trapping my king more. King f8, I have to get my king out. b4. Now I have a passed d pawn. So I have to push my passed d pawn before he gets his rooks to the 7th. Trying to activate my rook. Okay, now one of the keys to being a good defender is seeing your opponent's threats. In this position, the reason my opponent played f4 and g5 was to play g6. For example, let's say I play b6. Just make up a move. Now he plays g6, and if I take, he plays h7. Oops. And, well, if I don't take, then everything wins. If I take with this pawn, then he takes with the rook, and I'm in a lot of trouble. So in this position, I played f3, getting my f pawn going. Never play f3. Rook c1, d4. Now he wants to double rooks on the 7th rank. So I take on g5, and that's why I played d4. That's why I played d4 last move. Attack his pawn on g5. If he plays g6, I could just take this way, and I'm relatively safe for the moment. And he's in time trouble here. I actually had a lot of time on my clock. King g8. Rook f8. And I have too many passed pawns. And I stopped his attack by using my king and my rooks. So he couldn't checkmate me. It's still not too late to blunder and lose. Oops. Any rook move vertically loses, but I moved rook to d8 so I could push my d pawn. I got 3 passed pawns, 1 for each of you. Also, I have a 4th one. King b2 instead of resigning. Rook f2 instead of resigning. I could still lose. I could mouse slip because we're playing on the internet. So I could, like, instead of playing rook d2 check, I mouse slip rook d3, then he mates me. That's why you never resign in a team tournament. But I played queen d4 check, so I can't mouse slip. Even if I played queen d3 or queen d5, I'm still winning. Then he resigned because I'm going to take his rook next move. Then there's no more mouse slips. So that game, my king was under attack, but I moved it towards the center. Then I got a lot of passed pawns as counterplay against his attack. And my main defensive resource was I saw why he played f4, g5 to play g6, and I was ready to meet that. Anyway, like to wrap up what you learned, make sure your king has escape squares when you're getting attacked. If your opponent has a big attack, trading pieces is a good idea, getting rid of all the pieces. And the most important is your name should be Ben. If your name is Ben, then nobody will attack you. What's that? That's not true? Well, you're imaginary. What do you know? Anyway, hope you enjoyed that lecture as much as Gukesh did. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I want to thank our sponsor again, Ben. Thank you, Ben. The lecture was Defensive Resources in Worst Positions. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.